Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I will definitely be sharing my screen at some point, but the goal is for me to have a conversation with you. So I'm not intending to present PowerPoint slides or anything like that, but a couple of documents that you will be able to hopefully enjoy as we're going through this. So I'm going to start by sharing a link in chat with you that contains everything that I'm going to be talking about today. So if any of you need to work through this content along with me, if you'd rather have a version of that content on your own end, then you'll be able to do that. It's a web page that has all the information that I'm going to be talking about, and every document is downloadable as a PDF. The PDF is accessible, of course. So if that works better for you, then you'll be able to do that as I'm walking through these different aspects. But for the time being, what I really want to do is have that conversation with you, like I said. To me, speaking started about 21 years ago. And one of my very first experiences with public speaking was at an accessibility event in Montreal back in 2003, really. And back then I was talking about, what I knew about accessibility, which was basically, alt text for images and things like that. And I remember this room, very small room, 20 people in it, probably couldn't contain much more than 20 people. And very old technology. I mean, what we had back then. So, squeaky screen, old projector, very poor lighting, no windows, no air conditioning, like pretty bad room. And this big table at the front where you could sit, and this wired mic, my wired microphone. And as I go up to the front of the room to start speaking, I noticed that the microphone's wire is tangled around one of the foot of the table. So I'm like, I'm not gonna bother. It's a small room. I like my voice projects. I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to start talking without that microphone. And I'd seen people before me not using it either. So I was like, I don't want to feel, obnoxious or arrogant holding this microphone in such a small room. So I'm just going to go. And I started doing my thing, what I had to cover at that time. And maybe 5-10 minutes into that presentation, I hear someone from the back saying, "Mike, please." I'm like, what? Like, who the hell is Mike? Like, what is this? And I'm trying to keep my focus and going through my content. And then I hear again, "Please use the microphone. I can't hear you." And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wow, this is really happening. And I'm freaking out. And I start, blurting some kind of an excuse about the fact that I thought that I would use it, but then I decided against it if I'd known, blah, 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 apologizing like a Canadian would. And after scrambling and struggling with the microphone to get it out of the table and everything, I tried to resume my presentation, my composure and everything, and I finish up the presentation, and it's pretty much downhill from there. And as we're going through this, towards the end of the presentation, the guy at the back of the room who said this stands up and he says, "You know what? I've been at this conference all day, all morning, and this is an accessibility conference, and all of you, none of you basically, have been very accessible through this. You weren't using the microphone. There were issues with, the colors on the slides. The guy before you did this and the other person did that." And he was pointing to a lot of things that had happened, and rightfully so. We didn't know any better. But to me, that was a huge learning moment. And it followed me until, since then, it followed me through, every year of my career as an accessibility specialist. And saying that, he just, got up and left. And, I wish I could tell you that afterwards we talked and we became friends, but I never, saw him again after that. But to this day, to me, that dude is still Mike. And Mike taught me a very important lesson that day. And that lesson was basically that, how can I be so damn sure about what I think I know about my audience? How can I make assumptions about what you need as an audience member? And how can I trust my own gut feeling to deliver something that will work for you and you and you and everybody? And the answer is I can't, but I have to be humble with this, and I have to accept the fact that I can't control everything. And once I do that, I'm set on a path where I want to become more inclusive as a speaker. So Rob said something at the beginning that I'm going to piggyback on a little bit. First, those of you who've met me before, who know me, I've been doing accessibility for 23 years now, a little more than that, and been very involved in assessments and presentations and training and things like that. And over the course of the years, noticed a lot of these issues that, or mistakes that people were making, that I was making, that I still make really today, that people do all the time about how they present information. So about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I got interested in the idea of taking WCAG concepts. For those of you who are new to this conference and don't know what WCAG means, it's WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, international standards for web content or accessible content online. So taking those guidelines and trying to apply them to a different space, which is communication. We have some information online, blog posts for the most part, some courses every now and then that will speak to content creation and accessibility. We've got some of that, but it's completely outshined by content for developers, to a certain extent, content for designers. Content creators are much less supported in that space than most other roles that are significant in the creation of web content. So I thought I should probably look into that a little bit. And the whole thing turned into a book at the end of that process, which was released earlier this year. I'll talk about that later. But the book set me on that journey to really understand how we can leverage a lot of the wisdom that has been put together by the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, by all the people that have contributed to accessibility, digital accessibility over the course of the next 25-ish years or so. And before that, even with the disability rights movements and everything that happened since the very beginning of the ADA, and then eventually the adoption of the ADA up until today. There's a lot that we've learned collectively, but I wasn't able to find anything anywhere that spoke to how do you take all this wisdom and you apply it to a conversation like this one so that everyone feels welcomed. So it's been my journey these last couple of years, and still is arguably, trying to help people understand how we translate this knowledge that we've developed into this new space, which is very poorly supported in that sense. Over the course of the creation of that book, for instance, I spoke to a lot of people who self-identify as having disabilities about their experiences being an attendee at a presentation, a conference, a meeting room, any event where there are people, and started gathering, what was a problem for them, the kind of challenge that they were running into, and found out that a lot of those things actually related back to concepts that were presented in WCAG, but just applied to a different space again. So it became something that was very rich in terms of an area to explore. And to me, it comes down to that very question that to this day, the question that Mike asked me 20 years ago, which was, how can you be so damn sure about what you think about your audience, about what that audience expects, what they want, what will work for them? And it's been haunting me since then, and even more so in the last couple of years, where all these things started coming together. Some of you might be familiar with this little story about Gilbert S. Daniels. It's called The Flaw of Averages. And so, back towards the end of the 1940s, the U.S. Army Air Force had a problem. Pilots weren't able to, keep the planes in the air, and planes were crashing regularly. Some pilots were losing their lives in the process, and it was a catastrophic problem financially wise for the Army, and just in general. And it came to like its worst moment that they had 17 planes in a single day that crashed, and they were wondering why that was. And they went back and researched and did a lot of research around this and inquiries around this, and came to the conclusion that all of their cockpits, regardless of the planes, the fighter planes, and remember that this is after the Second World War, so there's been a lot of evolution technologically around the planes, and the planes were more powerful and going faster and stronger, bigger, and everything, but the cockpits had not been redesigned since 1926, and that was 14, 15 years before. But the technology had evolved quite a bit. So people started thinking maybe the cockpits are no longer adapted to the needs of the pilots, and therefore that's where they're crashing their planes, because through their studies, they were finding out that the pilots were competent. So it was not a problem of pilots not being able to handle the planes. They certainly were able to do that. But in that split-second decision moment, things weren't working the way that they used to. And so when they realized that the cockpits were old, they figured, oh, let's do what we did in 1926, and let's just survey a bunch of pilots, get the average measurements of everyone, and we'll design a new cockpit based on that. And sure enough, they did. And the first time around, they had surveyed a couple of 100 people, pilots, and had taken 140 measurements on those different pilots. The length of the arm, the distance between the thumb and the index, like a bunch of different measurements like this, and went on to do the exact same thing again at the end of the 1940s. One of the researchers that worked on that huge project was Gilbert S. Daniels. So he was a younger scientist, and wasn't convinced about that approach, thinking, I'm not sure that that's really a good way to go. Don't really know why, but it feels off. So while the Army was going over this new research, which this time had over 4,000 different pilots, and again, following the same 140 measurements, he went out and looked at the data that was being gathered around this. And he took the 10 more important data points that came out of that 140 different specs or criteria that they were looking at, and tried to look through the entire results and see how many people actually fit the mold of the average pilot. And he found that not one of them came within 15% of being aligned with all 10 of those top different criteria or measurements. And he concluded that if you build a cockpit that is meant for the average pilot, you're in fact designing a cockpit that doesn't fit anyone. And I think this is well, first of all, it was a revelation from a design standpoint, and some of you know that story, and I've heard that story before. And the reason why you've heard that story is because it has been so foundational in our understanding of how accessibility, well, not accessibility, but it comes to accessibility, but how design, when you design for the average user, is a completely flawed way of thinking. And instead, you have to flip that around and learn more about your user so that you design something that will work for everyone as much as possible. And then we go from this general idea of universal design, which magically works for everyone, to inclusive design, where you're looking at the needs of everyone and you're adapting your project based on that. And that's one of the ways in which we ended up having adjustable seats, for instance, or different ways that we could accommodate the cockpit in that case, but our cars today, so that when the seat is too close or too far back removed, we can adjust it, the steering wheel and everything. Like all these different things are now adjustable because of that understanding. And yet, when we come to presentations, we very much have this one-size-fits-all approach, which doesn't work. If I'm sharing my screen with you, which I'm going to do in a couple of minutes, if I'm sharing my screen with you and I'm showing you this graph, and I'm saying, as you can see here, we've got all these different results. You can read them and talk to this or that and not mention specifically what I'm talking about. Some of you will be able to follow along because you can see clearly and you have no issue with the content that's there. But some of you will struggle with the information because if I don't mention it verbally, you can't follow, you can't keep up. So, one example out of many, that a particular delivery style or like a unique delivery style will only work for some and not for others, because not everybody fits within, say, the 10 top considerations for the average user. We all have jagged profiles when it comes to that, and some things are not going to work, and some things are going to work, or some things are going to work good enough that it works for us, but only if we actually, make the effort of doing that. And the onus of understanding the content shouldn't be on you, should be on me as a presenter, should be on the person that presents. I mean, that's my responsibility to make sure that what I'm talking about will be something that you can relate to. It's my job to make you feel included in that conversation, not your job to work hard to be part of the story. So when we look at this audience composition, I mean, a lot of you already know a lot of these statistics, but very quickly, for those of you who aren't as familiar, and I'm going to share my screen for that real quick, just to show you a couple things here. Let's see here. So something that most of us are familiar with is that in the United States, for instance, now 27% of Americans have a disability. So the number used to be 26%. Back in, I think, March or April of this year, the CDC updated their data. It's now 27%. So more than 1 out of 4 American, working age adult has a disability overall. So assuming that, these folks are also active, and these folks are also interested in learning, and these folks also need to attend presentations, or are interested in things that happen outside of their own little ecosystems, those folks attend conferences as well. Maybe not to the exact same ratio, but I feel it's fair to say that if we have 27% of the population that has a disability, there's probably a good likelihood that around 20% at least can be in any presentation, as today, or any conference out there. If as a speaker we don't pay attention to that, there's a problem already. In terms of money, because a lot of people tend to think that, yeah, why bother, really? I mean, these folks don't have any money or anything. It's $500 billion in after-tax disposable income for these same folks. So $500 billion is what we're talking about in terms of revenue, money available to them, and all that good stuff. So significant, both from an economical and a societal standpoint. It's a lot of people. What we rarely talk about is the following. So on top of people with disabilities, on top of that, 60 some million Americans that have a disability, there's also another 83.1 million people that are between the age of 50 and 69. I'm 52, so I just got into that special club, and I can already tell you, if you're younger than I am, that your sight does deteriorate, your hearing does deteriorate, all of your senses are affected by aging. You all know that already, but there's nothing like actually living it to realize that that's really a thing. So on top of people being disabled, having disabilities, you've got a significant portion of the working age population, those who, are going to be in conference rooms and are going to be in meeting rooms and are going to be part of these events that are happening, that are aging. We rarely think about them. When you hear someone talking about accessibility, they talk about, working age population, and they talk about seniors. And, seniors are important, but the likelihood of finding someone who's 75 in a board meeting room is less likely. And, arguably, if someone was there and you were paying attention to these accessibility considerations, they'd be fine anyway. But the group that we really forget about is this group sitting right in the middle that may or may not have a disability, but are still part of the working population and are definitely not accounted for as much. And that alone is 25% of the population. Now, of course, between that age group and people who have disabilities, there's a lot of overlap. So, I'm saying 52% of working age audience is potentially disabled or getting significantly older. It's less than that because, things overlap. But again, if we're being honest, it's probably 35-ish, 40% maybe, which still would mean that in every single audience that you attend, like here in this audience, for instance, we're currently 380 people are currently in the room right now. So if we're saying that 40% of that group has either a disability or requires some kind of accommodation to really be able to, participate properly, you do the math. How many people does that mean? 10% would be 38. So times 2, 76, times 2, 150 something, it would be what 40% would look like. And if we're being conservative, if we agree to the idea that anyone between the age of 50 and 69 could fully benefit from a more accessible experience or inclusive experience, then that number is actually higher. And maybe it goes closer to 50%. Maybe it goes closer to 190 people right now in the room. So this is important. This is a lot more important than we realize. And my question then becomes, like, what are we doing to make sure that those folks, we feel included as well? And that's what set me on that path initially, to try and figure out a better way to approach this so that we would be more inclusive in more than just the website, because that's important for sure. I mean, captioned videos are great, they're really important, but there's more to it than that. And I think that after 25-ish years of WCAG, we're ready to go further. We're ready to go to ask for a little more than that, and demand that the experiences that we have in a public space, whether it's online or in person, be more inclusive of everyone as well. So when I was about 8 years old, it was in geography class, so we had a test that day. So, that would be, for me, that would be like 1979 or so, 1980, maybe at the most. So we have this test in geography class, and I'm Canadian again, as I said, so you'll relate to that part soon. And our test that day is going to be to color the different provinces of Canada from the West Coast to the East Coast, and we're being rated on our ability to know where each province is. A very simple test. So let me just show you again something here that will speak to that on the screen, and I'll describe what I'm showing at the same time. There we go. So what I'm showing on my screen is an example of what that test most likely looked like. I have a line at the top left corner to write my name. So, wrote my name there with my little crayon. And then we have this map of Canada, that just the outline of the map, every province is outlined. And on the right-hand side, there's the instructions. So color each province following the instructions below. British Columbia needs to be in yellow, Alberta needs to be in brown, Saskatchewan needs to be in burgundy, Manitoba in green, Ontario in red, Quebec in blue, New Brunswick in orange, Prince Edward Island in purple, and Nova Scotia in pink, and then Newfoundland and Labrador in gray. So pretty simple test. I studied really hard for that test. I know them really, really well. I really do. And one of the reasons why I know them is because I like to succeed, but also sitting on the left of me is Julie Labelle. Julie Labelle is the most beautiful girl in school, and I really want to impress her. So one of my reasons for being good on that test and doing well, I want her to notice me. So I really did study for that, and I really know that. And so we go. We go through that test, work through everything, and we're all writing. Coloring the provinces, and I go in and I end my test, and I'm confident that 10 out of 10 and knock that out of the park. So we go for recess, lunch. We come back. When we come back from lunch, the teacher hands us our results, and I have 4 errors on my test. I have 60%. Like, how is that even possible? And raise my hand, ask questions. I don't get it. I mean, I really study hard for this. I know what they are. How can I possibly have made 4 mistakes? And the teacher, Mrs. Major, tells me, well, you either didn't study as hard as you think, or you were very inattentive because you failed on 4 provinces. You missed You missed your color on Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. All 4 of them aren't the right color. And I'm like, well, that's not true. I mean, you asked for us to color Alberta in brown, and I did. Brown is right here, and I'm pointing right now to a province that's colored in green. You said that you wanted Manitoba to be in green. So, I mean, Saskatchewan to be in Burgundy, and I did that. And Saskatchewan is colored in a color that I can't really tell you because guess what, colorblind, so I don't really know. But I'm convinced that this is Burgundy. So I raised that crayon and I showed that to her as well. And he said, Manitoba needs to be in green. So of course I did that. And I raised my red crayon for that one. And then you said, Ontario, you need to be in red. And then I raised the Burgundy one. And kids start laughing around me. And, that's bad enough, but Julie's also laughing. And that's not good because that really goes against my plan. So I get frustrated. And I've always been a little feisty, I guess, a little combative. So I'm probably being a little too arrogant for my own good. So, get kicked out of the class as a result of that. And on my way to the director's office. And that was the moment to me where I realized that I wasn't like the other kids, that there was something wrong about me. And I'm using air quotes here, something wrong about me. And now everybody knew it because kids were laughing at me saying, yeah, weirdo, you can't even tell green from brown and you don't even know what red looks like. So no, I'm labeled at that point as the weirdo. So to me, that's the moment where I learned that I was different. Didn't know what that meant, but I certainly wasn't like the other kids. So I want to ask you, in your own life, is there a moment where you felt something like that? It doesn't have to be related to your ability to perceive colors, of course, but have you ever felt a moment where you knew there was something about you that was different, off, weird, unconventional, not normal, atypical, something like that? And if so, how did that make you feel? So if you would want to play along with me, I'd like for you to maybe use chat and just start typing the word that comes to mind when it comes to how you felt when it happened, just to get a sense of what that felt for you, how that felt for you. So I'm seeing words like alone, othered, frustrated, shame, debilitating, uncomfortable, different, dumb, anxious, failure, embarrassed, confused, insecure, misunderstood, useless, worried, angry. So powerful words, right? What I want you to understand from this is not so much that, I failed a test 40 years ago, but that when someone feels excluded, feels othered, feels different, that's how they feel. We understand that for accessibility when it comes to the web, yet we don't really think about it when it comes to presentations. When we present things in a way where people don't feel included, that's how they feel. People feel like they're isolated and confused, discriminated against. They feel angry, they feel vulnerable. That's how they feel. We can fix that by being a bit more aware, a bit more sensitive to the way that we approach our presentations and our delivery of those presentations so that people don't feel that way. And that's really the idea there. And the funny thing is when you look at, hold on here, there we go. So once you look at the ability to perceive colors and you test, like in this case, what we were testing was my ability to know where a province was based on how I could color it with the right color. But that wasn't the question. The question was, do you know where the provinces are? Do you know what their names are? And I knew that. I just wasn't able to associate the color with the name or the location. If the question had been better, I would have had 10 out of 10. If the question didn't ask me to use a particular color for that one province, I would have used the color that I wanted. It would have been fine. But, and I'm talking about, like a Canada map here, not very relevant, but this general idea of using color for as a way to convey information is everywhere in the way that we communicate with people. As someone who's colorblind, I know that in my very core, every single day, I look at information that's based on color and I'm taking guesses or I'm completely clueless because I don't really know how to, connect the dots. And something that I like to do is really looking at this information here. So for those of you who can see my screen, you can see the colors that were added to the provinces. And if you're wondering why the top is not colored, it's because those are territories. And, in the 1980s, they didn't really count. Today they would, but back then, we didn't really think about either the territories or anyone who lived there for that matter. That changed over the years, hopefully, thankfully. But they weren't part of the test. But those colors are here, and if you can perceive colors, you can see that, despite some of them being in the wrong color, with my association between west in the actual map and west on the right hand side in the legend there, I missed some of them. But if I remove colors entirely from there, and all of a sudden everything is grayed out, all of us who can see this are equally disadvantaged when it comes to this. You can't tell anymore whether or not British Columbia was indeed yellow or gray or light green or light blue. You have no idea to tell. And now when you're looking at the provinces in the middle for the prairies, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, for instance, here in that general area, again, they're all different shades of gray, darker or lighter gray. There's no way for you to know whether or not these things are good. So when we're looking at going back to our presentations, for instance, we're looking at that particular topic, and you have information on, graphs or slides, and you're using information to share that content with people, you can't be surprised if some people are having a hard time going through your content. Some of them will not be able to correlate, colors with information. Others will not even be able to really see what you have there because it's a little too small, or their vision is a little too blurry, or they didn't get to the room in time to be close enough to the screen or the stage. Therefore, they're sitting a little too far back and they can't really see all that much. So if you don't take, if you don't make the effort to really describe what you're doing, people are going to miss out on what you're presenting. And when they miss out, they fade out. They're no longer there. They take out their phones. They think of other things. They get frustrated. And if your goal is to turn them into, fans or clients or people who will want to follow you, you're doing the exact opposite by not being able to cater to their expectations. And none of us want that. I mean, if you're going to spend, 50, 60 hours on a presentation, you want to rock it, knock it out of the park for everyone. You don't want 40% of your room to leave the session thinking like, what a ripoff, that I wasted my time and that person didn't know anything, and make them feel all the words that we collectively added to chat a couple minutes ago. So there's something in there that's quite important. So going back to that research, these last 5 years or so, started talking to speakers also. I happen to be a member of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, so I'm surrounded with people who do this for a living. I learned a ton from them. I still do, and going through that, I had the perfect benchmark to really evaluate how professional speakers actually do this. So I spent the last 5-6 years analyzing how they present information, and found out that even the most professional speakers, the ones that demand the biggest fees, are pretty clueless when it comes to inclusion. They're really great at what they do. They have great stage presence. They have stage mechanics that are amazing. They command the room. They're very engaging and everything, but only for those who are lucky enough to be able to fit into their conception of what the average user is, because they don't know any better. So there is an opportunity to help even the most experienced speakers get better by looking into inclusion, which fed into my desire to contribute something, because there was nothing in that space out there that I could find, at least. I want to show you the result of that work. At the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned this page here, so I'm going to put that link in chat again for you. Let's see, where's chat now? So that link is to this page that I'm currently showing. It's a page that I put together on my website for today's event. Basically speaks to all the different handouts that I'm going to be using. So right now we've seen 2 of them, the one about audience composition and stats, and then the one about the colorblind asset that I shared with you. Towards the bottom of this page is a section about, where is it now? But it's not that page. Hold on a second, it's here. Let me just go to this page here. There we go, here. So on this page here, I have this little piece that is the result of what I've been looking into. And so excuse the scrolling there. But what I found out is that every speaker out there, every one of us who ever presented in front of a group, whether it's a conference like this one or a meeting room at our job, we fall somewhere on the spectrum from instinctive to inspired to involved to invested to inclusive. And depending on how familiar we are with the idea of inclusion, then we fit somewhere in that general spectrum. The instinctive speakers, honestly, are most of us. We are very much seeing the audience as an extension of ourselves, which means that what we like is what we're going to be doing because we feel comfortable with that. And people will like it because we like it. And we know, it makes sense to us, so we present that way. That's where you'll see people making a lot of assumptions about, one size fits all approaches to presenting, or to slides, big slides with a ton of words on them, like all these different things is what you're going to see. And then as you get a bit more familiar with different concepts, such as learning styles, and I know that learning styles are very loaded because not everybody believes in their value, or whether even that there's such a thing as learning styles. But even if you don't agree with the fact that we might be either visual learners or auditory learners or kinesthetic learners, basically meaning that we learn basically through sight, hearing, or action, movement, and that instead you feel that we're on the spectrum of all those things, which is really what I believe. There is still something that drives us, motivates us to learn when different mechanisms are being used. If you're someone who believes in this, and you're on purpose trying to shift things around so that your presentation is not always just one way to present, but you're mixing things up, you're probably somewhere on the inspired speakers part of that spectrum, a little further down that road. But what I found is that even the most experienced speakers, professional speakers, typically that's where they cap. They don't really go any further than that. When we start seeing a bit of a difference is when people are actually looking into disabilities and the impact of disabilities, what that might mean, and to their presentation, how that might affect how they present something. It might be the presenter who puts alt text on the images on the PowerPoint, or it might be someone who pays attention to using links that don't just say click here, for instance. When you start getting those concepts a little bit, but very little about it, that's typically the involved one. You're starting to look into different tips and tricks that might help you, but you don't have this overarching understanding of what's going on. Invested, you're a bit further down that road, where you know the techniques, you understand how these things work, you change the way that your dynamics, you change your delivery style, you adapt to all these different things so that you're more inclusive. And then your inclusive speaker might be your Yoda, for instance, that will teach others and work with others to help go further down that journey. So 5 different steps is what I found, and I was amazed to realize that most people are really at the very beginning of that journey. So if you're someone who presents, if you're someone who works in this space, if you're someone who's interested in working in this space, this is a great area to explore. It's a great way to take all your knowledge that you've acquired over the years, or that you're currently acquiring, and moving it over to a new area that has not yet been explored. Grow, the contribution that you bring to society by helping make other things inclusive and not just web content again. One of the documents that I have in this webpage is a series of personas. So as I was going through this process, of course, working with different people who were sharing their experiences, then I started looking into patterns, because that's what researchers do. So patterns about this. And again, even though personas, I'm a little on the fence as to whether or not they're really all that good, and whether or not they lead you into making a lot of assumptions about users. But there's a part that I really, really love about personas, and that's being able to help someone who's new to a particular topic wrap their head around it. I don't know that personas are all that useful for like a super experienced UX designer, but they're incredibly useful for someone who's trying to understand, what do you mean someone who's blind would come to my presentations? What do you mean someone who's deaf would come to my presentation? Why would they want to do that? They can't hear anything. If someone is at that place, which of course, again, is most speakers out there, personas become really interesting, because what you can do then is you can start looking into something like this. Let me share my screen again and bring us back to this next document here. And then you get a document like this one. So it's something you can download from that page again that I shared with you, but where you can have a portrait of a particular audience member, and very stereotypical, of course. So I get that part about not everybody's like this, and if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Like I get all of that, but as a way to help someone figure out what works or doesn't work for folks that have that particular kind of disability, or that might struggle with something related to sight or hearing or this or that, I think those are pretty good, because what they are basically a series of do's and don'ts. So let me just make that a little bigger for you here. So, a couple of do's and don'ts about what you could or what you should or shouldn't do if you want to be more inclusive, to say someone like Nick, who happens to be colorblind like me. So, you should always make sure that you identify insufficient contrast, something that we know about from 1.4.3 in WCAG. And you should never expect other people to be able to perceive colors or combinations of colors the way that you do. Back to my teacher in 3rd grade, who expected everyone to know what burgundy was. But honestly, for me, burgundy, brown, red, it's all the same thing. I mean, I don't see any difference. Some are darker or lighter, but they're all the same thing. I can't tell you what they are. I really don't know. Brown and green, no idea. Purple and blue, no idea. Light green and yellow, no idea. I don't know. But I can tell a difference between a light color and a dark color, but that doesn't help me figure out where Alberta is, clearly. So how do we make sure that people who are in our meeting rooms or our audience can follow along if we stick to something like this? So there's 8 personas in there, and I'll let you, explore through that, because we don't have the bandwidth to do that today. But there's 8 personas, and for each one, there are 10 ideas like this. So 80 tips and tricks that you can take today and say, in my next presentation, in my next meeting, I'm going to pay attention to this, and this, because I want to get better at doing that. So we've got one for dyslexia, we've got one for color blindness, we've got one for blindness, one for hard of hearing, we've got one for anxiety, we've got one for aging, ADHD. I think that's 8 total that are in there. So I offer this to you as a way to help you walk down that path. For each one of those personas, there's also another page where I'm asking you, so do you systematically do this, or this? Which are the 10 same ideas that, and the idea here is that you should be doing this if you really want to get further down that journey of becoming an inclusive speaker. You should incorporate these techniques, these ways of working, so that when you present, you're avoiding all the potential hurdles or pitfalls that you might otherwise fall into, because you wouldn't know about these different things. So this is a gift to you. If you want to use any of that, feel free to do so. It's I think it's got some value for sure. Now, next thing on my list would be, it's possible that a lot of you are wondering right now, so just how inclusive am I when I'm presenting? That would be a pretty natural thing to ask yourself. So let me just go back to sharing the screen again, because now I want to go back to the web page that I initially presented to you, which is here. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so back to the initial web page. I'm going to drop that in chat again if that's helpful for folks. Here. Okay, so on that web page, a little further down, on the left-hand side, you've got all these different, let's see, you've got all these different documents that I'm talking about. So this is the one we just looked at. And a little further down, there's this, shouldn't be long. Why can't I find it? I think I just passed, right? I went right past it. hold on. Again, sorry for the scrolling here. You know what, let me just do this real quick because I can't find it anymore. Yeah, that part here. So on the right-hand side of that document, if that's helpful, there's a heading that's labeled as a speaking or communication expert, just how inclusive do you think you are? There's a big red button. If you can't see red, look for a button that says take the inclusive speaking test today. It's a free test. If you go to that page, I'm going to drop that link in chat as well for those of you who care. But if you go to that page, you'll be asked 10 questions. And all those questions are on a Likert scale, basically from never to always. And you can see, like, and you want to be honest with yourself, of course. And you can answer all those questions, and it will put you somewhere on that spectrum from instinctive to inclusive. So the first one that I have here on the screen is, do I systematically remind myself that after a while, audience members will be craving for opportunities to get their blood flowing? If this was an in-person presentation and it was a workshop for 2 hours, I wouldn't want you to be sitting for 2 hours. I would have you move around. I would have you do different things. If you can, of course. I would also actually offer you the ability to graciously opt out of moving around if that's not something you want or can do. Like things like that would be part of what we're doing. But be reminded that if you're sitting for, say, 2 hours, at some point, you might need to move for different reasons. From us on a scale of never, rarely, sometimes, usually, and always, you would answer all 10 of those questions. You leave me your email and name at the bottom, so we can have that conversation. And what I give you in return is the result of your test and put you on that scale from instinctive to inclusive. And if you run that test multiple times, you'll get different questions because there's almost 200 questions in there. And the more you do it, the more you'll be able to fine tune what your profile actually looks like. And every question is an opportunity to learn. So if you thought 80 questions or 80 tips was great in that document, I'm giving you 200 here. So way more than you need to get started. But what I'm giving you is a journey to go from where you are, wherever that might be, to where you might want to go eventually through work, effort, and thinking around learning to do things differently. So I want to share that link with you as well. Again, all those links are in the document, but for those of you who like to have the links ready, it's in chat now. Please, have fun with this and do with it what you will. And as we're nearing the end of the presentation, I want to go back to the story about the geography test to wrap things up a little bit with you. When I got sent to the principal's office, I ended up in the nurse's office, and she started asking me questions about what's going on, and she wanted to figure that out. So she took out this big book with a bunch of circles in it, and every circle has a bunch of smaller circles into it. It's called the Hishiara test, basically to determine whether or not people are colorblind. And there were like 29 circles or so in there on different pages. And I was supposed to see numbers in the circles. I wasn't really seeing numbers in pretty much none of them. A couple I could, but some of them, if I squinted enough, I would perceive something, but I wasn't really sure. But for the most part, I wouldn't see anything. And that's when she said, oh, okay, you're colorblind. And I remember as a kid thinking, oh, does that mean I'm going to die? Am I going to turn blind? Like, what is going to happen to me? Like, it was really scary for a moment. And she just said, no, you'll be fine. You're just not normal like the other kids. And that stuck with me. This idea of not being normal stuck with me, and still does today. I mean, it's informed so many of my decisions. It's led so many of my of how I think, having been labeled that way as a kid. Of course, as I grew older, when I got over it, because it's really not that big of a deal when you think about it. But it also helped me figure out that as I discovered, being somewhere on the neurodiversity spectrum, autism or something is certainly in there somewhere. Some aspects of it are there for sure. It's a constant reminder that there's this label, you're either normal or not normal, which is something that we need to fix. And again, I think that this topic here is a solution, one of many solutions to do that. But years and years later, what I realized is that in this story, my teacher was basically a representative of the villain in my story. She's the person who, brought the bad news to me, who made me feel a certain way. And in that sense, she's very much like the medical model of disability, where, I was broken, I had a problem. Her test was not the problem, my condition was the problem, and it was my fault. And when I got to the nurse's office, and it was not about me, it was about, a situation, and here's the solutions that you have. She was very much the social model of disability, which is really that, the problem is not you with a disability, the problem is your environment. If we make your environment better, you won't have a problem, you won't have a challenge, you'll be able to, function like everybody else does. And I want to show you something that kind of blows my mind also, because it's so simple, and yet at the same time, so powerful. If I go back here, and I'm going to share my screen again and share this with you, but if I go back to the map of Canada that I was sharing earlier here, and it's still showing the grayscale version of it. Remember, the whole point of this was me being able to associate instructions on the right-hand side with a color to coloring the right province. But if the test had been different, let's say that my teacher knew a little bit more than she did, her test might have looked like this instead, where we would have had the exact same map on the right-hand side, the exact same set of instructions, but the instructions would have said something a little different. Instead of saying, color according to, these colors, it would have been something like identify every province with a color of your choosing. And a little box that I could have drawn with a particular color for British Columbia, and then go and take the same color and apply it to that province. If I could have chosen the colors myself, I would not have known what colors they were much more than I did otherwise, but I would have associated the right rectangle on the right-hand side to the right province. I would have nailed all 10 of them the way that I did. And then I would have gotten the girl, which was really my goal. But that didn't happen. And it didn't happen because my teacher was the representation of this model, of the medical model of disability, where it was the problem. She never even for a second considered that her question was wrong or her test was wrong. It was all about me being the problem. And I say this to you because our presentation materials, our content is the exact same way. What I challenge you to do is look at how you present your information and ask yourself, if this is really the right way to present it, or if you're biased or not with the way that you present information. Chances are you're biased. We're all biased. And you can maybe learn from that a little bit. So I'm going to stop here because we're running out of time. And just quickly wrap up with that document again. So the link that I shared with you has information in it and more more documents that you can download if you want to. One of them is a template to look at your presentations and guide you through making decisions, strategies about how you're going to present such and such information so that you are being more inclusive by design on purpose. Another one of those documents speaks to the book a little bit. So if you're interested in getting that book, you'll find a link in there as well. My goal here is not to push the book to you. So I'm going to let you go and look for that if you want to, but it's easy enough to find. Inclusive Speaker, Denis Boudreau, Amazon, or whatever. And then there's also a newsletter. So if you're interested in getting these tips on a daily basis, every single day I send out a tip, either about inclusive speaking, about something to know from an accessibility standpoint, different information that can help you grow this skill set. This is something you want, then there's a free newsletter, of course, that you can also subscribe to. And with that said, I'm going to stop now because it would be nice to have a couple of questions if you have any. Thank you.
Denis, thanks so much. That was great. There were a lot of really very quotable things that came out of that. And I love that story. I've heard you tell the airplane story before, and it's fantastic every time. I do want to pass on a couple of questions. Monica asked if you or others, so if others have insight into this, feel free to drop that into the chat. Have microphone or audio set up recommendations for hybrid meetings where you've got people in the room and you have people on Zoom or Teams, whichever platform it might be. She asked specifically, do people have experience using a box microphone, one the people in a physical room can pass around and then picked up by online participants? Basically just that general question of in this hybrid world that we live in, does anyone have any insights or recommendations about technology to pipe audio out to everybody effectively?
Yeah. I mean, I think by now, 4 years into, well, I mean, 4 years after COVID started, we all get that a good microphone, a good camera is valuable when you're presenting. I could have used my, and arguably, I'm in my grandparents' house that I haven't visited in 40 years, so I'm limited here because I'm traveling. But I could have used my, my webcam on my computer. I chose to use my phone instead. It's a much better camera. My lighting isn't great, but at least the camera was better, and a good microphone, at least that much. But indeed, when you're in a in-person setting, being able to use either those box mics, anything that you can pass around from Bluetooth with charged batteries, of course, will make sure that your audio is picked up in the room everywhere. I think that's a bare minimum. And when it isn't the case, and sometimes arguably even when it's the case, if it doesn't get picked up by the AV system, as a speaker, your responsibility is to repeat the question before you actually answer it. Because if people don't have the context for it, whether because they didn't really hear it in the room, or they're hybrid and they're not in that room and they missed it, what's the value of a response if you don't have the question beforehand? I mean, that's where I would start for this, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's one of the many things that speakers just completely overlook a lot of the time is thinking about, I heard the question, most everybody heard the question, that must mean that everyone heard the question. So that, and somebody made the comment in the chat as well, just repeat the question. It looks like I would guess we have time for one more. I'm just going in the order that these are coming through, so apologies if we can't get to everybody. What's your recommendation about mentioning color in alt text?
I think it depends on context again. I mean, oftentimes the colors don't matter as much as we think they do. If the colors really convey something important, then it should be part of your alt text because it helps to the meaning. But I guess not forget that your alt text is not just for blind people using screen readers. Your alt text is also valuable for SEO purposes and other things. So you want it to be relevant. If mentioning that something is red actually helps understanding the context of that object, then by all means speak to it. But much in the same way that I would not describe the color of a person's sweater on a picture, because why bother? I would not speak to the color if it's not something that's relevant. So it's really a question of context, much like everything else in alt text science, if there's such a thing as science for that.